Episode 75 is a follow up of episode 74. So I kindly request you to first listen to episode 74 to very well connect with our discussion in episode 75. Thank you and enjoy this episode. And how well is the alliance led by the US is working? And just follow up to add on this as well. Does Taiwan and other countries face any dilemma in this situation? And what are the potential impact and opportunities of the global chip supply chain?
Definitely, this export control and the alliance, because there's this FDP rule that leads the alliance. FDP is foreign direct product rule. Basically, this rule says that if any country, which is a US ally, the companies of that country, if they're using a technology which in any stage includes a technology which is American, it also restricts them to transfer those technologies without US license. So that brings all these companies, Netherlands, Japan, South Korea, into the radar of US sanctions. So definitely, this situation has been challenging for China. There have been uh, chip crunch in the domestic market, and there has been turmoil. But I don't think it is perfect. It is far from being perfect. The alliance has partially failed because of several loopholes. For ex- uh,
Wow.
first, First, I would say there are waivers that US has provided to these allies. So, taking advantage of these waivers, the technology have already been possessed by the Chinese, and we know the kind of hoarding that could happen in such situations. Especially Chinese are good because they have several they have a wide market, several companies functioning. So hoarding has become very common in these previous years, not even when the export control hit the market, but I would say that even before the export controls were coming, this tendency of hoarding and this tendency of building domestic synergies, this started because China could anticipate that something like this is coming up. Secondly, I think US thinks that licensing only can stop the trade between American and Chinese companies. But Chinese are very smart. They have come up with dozens of shell companies. So even if there's a company that BIS, that is Bureau of Industrial Standards of US Department of Commerce, if they have listed through their entity list that okay, these are the 160 companies that we have banned your trade with, but then these companies will produce other companies in their face, and so various shell companies have come up in the market that can easily bypass the rules. This is one of the biggest loophole through which these things have been failing. Third, I would say the choke point strategy. Now, I think I can also talk about what choke point strategy is. Choke point are the technologies which
Yes.
are in the value chain. For example, manufacturing, semiconductor manufacturing equipment devices. So these are important to build any kind of advanced chip. So if you don't have a particular machine which only Netherlands ASML can sell, you practically cannot make any advanced chip. So this is a choke point strategy that US has employed. That yes, we will restrict. They have signed an agreement with Netherlands ASML that you cannot sell particular machines uh, to China. So, so the biggest flaw of this choke point technology or choke point strategy is that by restricting access to a particular technology, you inadvertently encourage the adoption of alternative technology, which Chinese are very good at. So, given the nature of Chinese technology ecosystem, it is fair to say that Chinese manufacturers excel at imitating technology and adapting it for local use. So, their manufacturing strategy often involves leveraging outdated technology to leapfrog and build newer advancements out of it. So, for instance, Huawei has utilized outdated ARM instruction. ARM is a company that design that provide architectures for mobile phones and other technologies. So this is a kind of design choke point technology that is required. So they have utilized an outdated version to employ in their latest developments. They have also utilized outdated EDA tools and DUV. These are lithography machines, which are used in the manufacturing process. Basically, in like common words, if I can say, these are the machines that print chiplets of wafers. So these tools, they have developed using these tools. They have developed competitive chipsets. For example, the biggest example of this is China last year produced a phone. Huawei produced its Mate Pro 60, if I'm not wrong, that has a Kirin 9000S processor, which is based on a 7 nanometer process technology. Now, this technology was under US sanctions. This was banned, but still they were able to develop it. So it is one of the biggest indications that also created shockwaves that okay, you did not have access to particular technology, still you have developed this. So this shows that US sanctions are not perfect; they have been failing. Another problem lies in understanding the chip development capabilities within various nanometer thresholds. Um, Okay, so if there is one particular equipment which is used to make, for example, 11 chip, vaguely speaking, that can
Yeah.
also, that can also be used in some way or the other after refurbishment to develop a lower end chip. That is, for example, maybe a 9 chip. So American short-sightedness lies in underestimating China's ability to acquire high tech through clandestine means. So the ban on equipment sales used solely on high-tech chip production. It did not intend to equipment and technology used for producing lower-end chips. So hardware devices in this way can be refurbished and they fall under a certain threshold, but still they can function and that can support lagging edge technology development. So these are the loopholes that allowed American firms to refurbish older chips into those chips that could lie just below the designated threshold and hence can be exported to China. We have seen there are several reports last year that said that Nvidia's high-end chips that were under restriction, the Chinese can continuously access these chips. These could be A100 and H100 chips. So they have had access to these technologies. Of course, the pressure forces allies to disengage with China, which would not have otherwise occurred so far, as each country wants to enjoy the competitive advantage of Chinese land and labor. But moreover, all chip makers record China as their biggest client, and disengaging with China comes with huge revenue loss, as I've mentioned previously. The non-cooperation of business corporations in this alliance politics, because these chips were sold by Netherlands ASML or maybe some gases or some other equipment materials were supplied by other nations which were allied only. These can be seen as an important factors that fails the alliance. There could be other impacts also that were earlier based on core businesses and commercial decisions are now seen in the geopolitical considerations. To be more particular, now business corporations are they increasingly have to go through national security considerations because of the pressure that is mounted by the US, especially on its allies nations, because they willingly do not want to disengage with the China completely.
Yeah. I think that's a very extended perspective, and I think I love the fact that you mentioned in detail about even the global chip supply chain too. And little bit coming from the international perspective to the domestic side. So, how are governments supporting the respect to domestic semiconductor industries, and what are the implications of these policies?
Um, sure. So I have noted the rising tide of industrial policies towards domestic capabilities. There are several policies that have been adopted by several governments. For example, China's Big Fund or US's Chips and Science Act. There's this European Chips Act produced by European Union, India's PLI, that is Performance Linked Incentive Scheme, and there are other big funding, given by Japanese and South Korean governments to develop their own industrial policies. So these are the ways in which domestic manufacturing of semiconductors have been promoted by the national governments. Countries are funding investors to set up mostly fundry segment part, as seen in Europe, India, US. They're inviting through, investment screening and all proposals. Then they are inviting, they are providing freelance and so there's an attempt to shift the industries from China to newer destinations, and that's where these new figures are coming up: Vietnam, Malaysia, and others. Even Taiwan is looking forward to diversify its foundry business. I've also already given the example of the Arizona factory. We have already heard its new factory. Yes. So, despite the fact that foundry business in the US is costly, I would say lots of attractive packages on the table are coming up with the governments, as I mentioned, this yeah, freelance and the government subsidies and exemptions from taxes. There are claims of providing cheap labor, etc. It remains to be seen whether these alternatives are better, as I've mentioned before. In my opinion, perhaps cheap and skilled talent is mostly concentrated in Southeast Asia, especially China. Mm, so the current leaders in the industry like TSMC are also under rising pressure to share their IPs and trade secrets. So I would say that this is one of the implications that countries are facing, other than expanding their national industrial policies, that they might have to face these problems related to trade secrets and IPs in future as well.
Yes. And I mean, just I think continuing on the same path, I would say, but on the private sector side. So, what strategies are companies employing to mitigate the risk of geopolitical tensions affecting their semiconductor supply chain?
Hmm. Um, when it comes to business, companies, I would say yes. Earlier, largely there were business considerations that were mainly in the picture when it comes to selling your products or developing your products in a particular way. But now, in recent years, we have seen they have to cater to large political considerations or geopolitical considerations. But actually, what companies want is profit. They care less about national security or particularly which country they sell their products to, unless there are factors involved like IP stealing or stealing of trade secrets, enforced, etc. So basically, chip makers want business that does not matter where does it come from, either China or India or UK. They just want business. So the biggest example of navigating these complications which are arising due to US policies are, I would say that this firm called Nvidia. I guess in my previous explanation, I mentioned that some particular chips of Nvidia, A100 and H100, these are one of the most advanced GPUs that only and only Nvidia produce. But yes, they
Yes.
were under the US sanctions. What Nvidia does is they degrade their chips to a particular level that it could fall under the US, out of the US sanctions, slightly out of that, so that they could sell it. So this refurbishing or degrading chips, this is going on a lot to somehow bypass the sanctions. So
Okay.
for even for the US companies or Japanese or Netherlands or even for the Chinese companies, this kind of this kind of strategy has become very common. Wherein everybody is trying to find a way out where they can bypass the sanctions and still do the business.
Okay, that's a very interesting, I think, thing you have mentioned. I would say that's a backdoor channel kind of diplomacy, or backdoor business opportunities that they are trying to explore now due to these complications. And I would say a little bit going ahead on the global economy side. So, what are the potential consequences of a semiconductor shortage on the global economy from your perspective?
Yeah. Well, having talked about the criticality of chips to various sectors, A chip
Yeah.
shortage can have large scale impact. The most important would be disruptions of supply chain in the electronic sector. So we have world's largest companies. They have something to do with chips. For any of their products which is related to electronics, everywhere chips will be used. So if there's an inability to manufacture or sell, it can create disruptions in the global electronics trade. The stocks of major companies are subjected to change or fall down. It could also, disrupt the production lines across sectors. For example, aerospace, defense, energy, everywhere for every machine you would need a semiconductor. If you do not get that, the production in all the allied industries and sectors, it will be severely affected, as we have already seen in the COVID-19 period because of the supply side crunch. It can possibly also lead to economic slowdown, as I said before, because of demands with supply crunches, the inflation of prices the inflation can go up. So also there are more vulnerabilities in the value chain, means heightened geopolitical tensions. More pressure to access critical technologies means um, more conflicts on chips, or heightened pace of the race. It could also happen, I guess in the start of our discussion, I mentioned that COVID-19 was an important event that highlighted the supply chain vulnerabilities, that also led to the heightened importance and this phase of domestication of supply chain or diversification away from China. So these kinds of vulnerabilities, if they come out during crisis, they create more pressure towards domestication of supply chains. Also, if that happens, if there is a supply demand crunch, that can slow down innovation. The kind of, for example, this slowdown can be partially seen in China because of lack of access to high-end chips. We can see that most of these generative AI applications, they are coming from the West, and I wouldn't say that Chinese do not have. There recently, uh, some Chinese leaders have claimed that one or two of their models are even more advanced than ChatGPT, but yes, they are entering late into the game, I would say. So this kind of slowing down of innovation, China in some or the other way has experienced due to the chip crunch. Other than that, I guess joblessness and impact on labor is also an issue that that can be looked at as a result of this disruption.
Yes. It's good that you provided a complete 360-degree perspective, I think, on this. Because generally when people say shortage of the semiconductors, they just focus on, the money aspect. But I think, yeah, you mentioned the labor and this aspect too. So it's great. And I think going on again, the geopolitical side. So can international cooperation in the semiconductor industry help reduce geopolitical tension? If so, then how?
Of course, I think this is crucial for building supply chain resilience, which this particular term has been, in the news for, I guess, the last 4 years. Even with respect to quiet meetings, this has come very often among the world leaders. Uh, in this, the role of government is largely supporting. Mainly, businesses will have to, in my opinion, will have to take the front seat here when it comes to building supply chain resilience. To help companies prepare for the resilience, and international collaboration can help to map the capacity and identify vulnerabilities and forecast demand or supply shocks. I think this can help them prepare better for any kind of future vulnerabilities that might be coming up. As I said, Quad supply chain initiative can be a good example here. Semiconductor alert system is something that they have come up with to assess the threat of the supply chain. So countries and governments, they need support of businesses, and they need to build trusted partnerships with countries with the complementary capabilities in chip sectors. There need to be cooperation in this regard. While these steps are useful to build these resilience, I'm afraid geopolitical tensions are here to go. As the competition against China, it remains zero sum. Because if you are, you must have heard of, if you're not on the table, you're in the menu. So it an
Yes.
important link in the value chain. That is what China is, and if you leave that, so to me it is questionable how inclusive this cooperation would be.
Interesting. And I think we are at the moment reaching the end of the podcast. So, yeah, from futuristic perspective, what future trends do you foresee in the geopolitical landscape of semiconductors over the next decade?
Okay. Having talked about the importance of chips at the start of this discussion, I think it has been understood that chips are critical AI development tools, which I can say its
Yes.
initial phase of advancement is VR when it comes to AI, because I guess in the future we'll have to see much more revolutionary developments. So more we move towards a future driven by technological tools and applications, the more advanced chips are required. So, since China remains behind the US and its allies, its efforts towards indigenization are not going to halt, rather rise. Since US insecurity is also rising, I do not say our tussle between superpower on this crucial tech is going to go away soon. However, an aggressive competition, which is currently going, it may not last long. There are reasons why. Because there's a larger rhetoric, as you also agreed in this discussion, that this cannot happen overnight. So, this large rhetoric, this indicates towards a tendency to move away from specialization and self-reliance that the industry has had in the last several years. This change remains little far from possible. This is little unrealistic. Uh, this this uh, this will take decades to shape, and it remains extremely fragmented. This industry itself is complex, and I believe even massively financed industrial policies, they cannot outrightly change it within a matter of few years. It also goes against the principle of comparative advantage and is very costly. So, as the industry evolved to respond to geopolitical fight, important changes might be expected. These could be the coming up trends, maybe. So we can move. We can see the industry moving towards exploring new components and applications. Like we can move towards application-specific integrated circuits, which are used to address a particular function. Or we can also move towards exploring materials beyond the silicon. The dependence on silicon is huge currently. So these kinds of trends might there's a possibility to see these in future.
Yes. Interesting. And I think, yeah, over this complete conversation, I believe there have been several questions which have popped up. So I hope in the future we might be able to address this through more episodes by recording more podcasts with you. And yeah, I think the last question that I have, uh, it's not related to a topic, uh, but the thing is, there are several people who listen to this podcast, especially from the industry, but there are also the people from outside of the industry, especially the student crowd, the research scholars, or the people who are trying to make their way into the international affairs domain, the geopolitical research, or even the space industry or the defense industry. So this final question is for them because I believe every person, the expert, the scholars who come on this podcast are uh, have something basically to offer in terms of insights or anecdotes that might help the students to progress in the near future in their career. So this question is from that perspective. What message would you like to give to the researchers, students, and experts who are working in geopolitics and international affairs?
Okay, I'll try to reflect some on that. I think for the
Yes.
industrial perspective, there's a lot happening and there's a lot going to happen. And considering the complexity, the fragmentation that the industry has, it is very difficult to say that what exactly could unfold. So I think considering the complexity, we continuously need to monitor the developments which are happening, because it is only going to further complicate. So, from the business and industry point of view, a regular analysis of the developments of the business changes, undergoing changes, it is required to keep a close look into that. I think the politics over semiconductors or this discussion is not only about discussing a particular technology, but this subject itself from an academic perspective remains vital to understanding various other subjects. Most importantly, how superpower rivalries are unfolding in the age of technology. Earlier, also, we have seen even in the Cold War, the times missiles and other nuclear wars and things, technology have reshaped how global powers were fighting. But this kind of Cold War that we are experiencing today, there's a significant amount of difference between the two. So there's a scope to understand superpower rivalries through this lens of semiconductor geopolitics. It can also be understood how emerging technologies, which are which are going to impact even more. More technologies we have, the more advanced we become, more applications it will have, and it will have implications for industrial policy landscape or avenues of bilateral or multilateral cooperation between countries. So there are multiple angles to look at. So there are interesting points of debates and discussions emerging in this particular space, and they are crucial from a futuristic perspective as well. So I guess a lot of research and a lot of discussion on this particular subject will be is not only relevant today, but it's going to go further in the particular subject. So I personally am looking forward to learning more and more into this in future.
Interesting. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much, Megha, for this crucial insights and the final message as well. I hope people love this episode because they definitely loved the critical minutes episode that we recorded last year, and this is after that we are making up this as a follow-up episode, on the same lines. And yeah, I'm looking forward to having you again on the podcast because there have been several questions which have popped up in between that we could have extended. But of course, due to the time limit, we had to keep it under the restriction. But definitely, in the near future, happy to have you again on the podcast. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.